This is Henry Frederick of Headline Surfer, and we're here today for our newest edition of the Roundtable. To my right is Sally Gillis of Warman Beach, and to my left is Stan Escudero of Daytona Beach Shores. We want to first bring up the issue of the primary. And Sally, what were your impressions of Tuesday night's results?
I liked that all the races had challengers. A lot of times, when you, especially in a primary race, just one side gets elected over and over again. There were some really good races this
Well, there were some incumbents though that were gone, which kind of opened the door for others.
But I think term limits are so important because at least you can get the bodies out of one seat and into another. I don't think that it was ever intended to be a lifetime sinecure. I think it was supposed to be public service, and you did your time and you got out.
But Stan, nothing's changed. The people that are well known still did very well. Matusik, McFall, Persis.
Of course.
You know, but there were some upstarts.
Well, Henry, name recognition means something, particularly with an electorate like the American electorate, which doesn't pay a great deal of attention to elections, and especially primary elections, even in a presidential election year. The significant thing here is that this is a county which has been ruled, even in nonpartisan races, by the Democrats for about 2 decades now. And they have done that largely without coherent opposition. Now what's happened is that the Republican Party has established itself as a legitimate contender for county office. That doesn't mean that they're going to sweep the boards. What it does mean is that the Democrats can no longer count on automatic re-election. They'll have to fight it out in the general election this fall, and they may very well win. They're much better funded, they're much better known, but they'll be in a fight. And that's the way it should be in any election.
Well, Sal, we were talking earlier about the election results, and there were some surprises where, even in cities where there were more Republicans and Democrats, or just about even, some Democrats still managed to squeeze through and be in a runoff. What does that tell you about nonpartisan races? Do you think people still identify with the name over the party?
I think they do, especially in the more local races. You know, like the school board is nonpartisan. Supposedly the county council is nonpartisan. But I think people recognize a name and they don't see anybody else they know, so they check that out.
The name recognition still is a dominant factor, even more so than party in some of the local elections.
I think it is, and in a way that's good. As someone who has run for city council in Boca Raton, for example, where I lived for 18 years, if you're a newcomer and you don't have name recognition, you're not going to get the money that you really need in order to be able to run a campaign. And the people who do have the money, mostly from special interests, lawyers, land speculators, they're the ones that are going to be able to put out all kinds of advertising that has no relationship to what their record really is. And that's what they did to me.
Well, Stan,
it's worth pointing out, though, it's worth pointing out that there was at least one race, I could probably think of more, but at least one race where name recognition didn't carry the day. In the congressional primary, on the Republican side, there were about 6 candidates competing. And obviously the best known one was Frank Costello.
Yeah,
he's
Frank Costello, right. I was surprised he didn't get
former mayor,
state rep.
State rep and so forth, very well known and respected and liked. And yet the winner was a fellow from St. Johns County, again, a very, no, I mean, it's the name is DeSantis, but that's not the point. The point is that he's very presentable. He's a retired naval officer. He has a beautiful wife, and he himself is very good looking. They're telegenic. But the real point is he was very, very heavily funded. And in this particular case, a combination of his own presentability and the good conservative arguments he made, plus the fact that he had a great deal more money than probably all the other candidates combined, enabled him to carry the day here, despite the fact that the majority of the population in what will be his congressional district doesn't live in St. Johns County.
Yeah, I was surprised too that, for example, in the state attorney's race, R.J. Larissa didn't win Volusia County. Stacia Warren, the former judge, and she won pretty good in Volusia County. She beat him fair and square, but he carried the other 3 counties, St. John's, Putnam, and Flagler in the 7th Judicial Circuit, 4 counties.
I was disappointed. I thought she made some excellent points during her presentations. They plea bargained too much stuff down in the state attorney's office. They have no victims advocates anymore.
Well, but I mean, the other thing too, I haven't covered courts. The money's just not there for those discretionary things. Like, you know, they have some victim advocates, they just don't have what they had in the past. And as far as plea bargains, nobody was more of a plea bargain than John Tanner. But
well, that's true. And he's not my favorite either.
Well,
I like
no, but I mean,
John
John was a good state attorney. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think in the case of Stacia Warren, it was just there wasn't enough to overcome an incumbent's record. You know, saying there's too many plea bargains or whatever. I mean, you can't really, in order to knock off an incumbent, you have to show that they're really incompetent, and to have the highest conviction rate in Florida, and 3 points above the state average. Plus, Larissa did something that we didn't pick up on this yet. He did something that a state attorney hasn't done in this county in this circuit in 20 years, and that's win second re-election from another opponent. In other words, Tanner won, then he lost to Alexander, and then Tanner won again. He was unopposed, then he lost to Larissa, and Larissa was supposed to lose this time, but he didn't. So that was a new trend.
Well, but Stacia Warren, very well known in the
Volusia County
area and Volusia County, in part because of her long years on the bench, but also
her husband Dan.
Yes, her father had been. I mean, her husband had been on the bench and was a highly respected person for a number of years, and this gave her a not only name recognition but very favorable, very respected name recognition within this area. However, she wasn't known outside the county.
Right. And
the state's attorney has a number of counties to be concerned with, and she simply couldn't compete with Larissa and the others.
Well, I think, especially in the northern counties where there's those distinct pockets like St. Augustine or Palatka, Crescent City. Those are areas where if you're not well known and you're not up there like he was from up there anyway.
Sure.
It's a little more difficult, and that's a big territory to cover.
It's a very big territory, and he's a very active state's attorney.
Before we get to the county chair's race, the only other thing I wanted to make a point of, and this will probably transition even into the third part, is the horrible voter turnout, 22%. That was worse than the midterm elections last time.
Yeah, and I know that the Republican Party made a full court press to get people registered.
Well, I think the Republican Party had a good showing
very well.
And getting number 2 candidates in all the county council races.
Absolutely, but also touching all the voters. You know, people just don't think primaries are important, but they are, especially when they're unopposed, because that person just automatically walks back in. And I don't think that should ever happen. I think we should hear the issues, see how people are going to deal with them.
Well, let's look at this race. Let's look at this primary though, where we had every county council seat had an opponent this time.
Yeah, that was great.
And nobody got it outright this time.
That's correct.
And I believe Republicans were in the top runoff in each one of those, right?
Well,
District
no,
3?
not quite. In District 2, Ken Ali came in third in a 3-person race. Josh Wagner came in first, Nancy Ebb second, and Ken Ali third. And now, after yesterday's recount, Jay Young is in third place, and Shannon McNeish is second, and then Mr. Daniels is in first place. So there were 2 of the 6 races being contended in which the Republicans, basically fell out of the game. Well, all the others, the Republicans are in second place except for one in District 1 over in DeLand and DeLeon Springs in that area, where there are 2 Republicans in the runoff, and the Democrat was completely swept out.
Pat Patterson was first.
Pat Patterson, and then Jeff Albach, and Missy Kelly was simply defeated.
Well, that was supposed to be the power couple of
neither Kelly is in politics.
Right. Well, I don't know how he thought he had a shot against McFall. And McFall she typically is the highest vote getter in any election locally.
Indeed. I think he probably committed before she got into the race.
Right, he did.
Thinking that he would be running against someone who would be easier to beat.
And that's how it was in the beginning.
Well, Pat Norley was going to run.
McFall
said she wasn't going to run because of a family issue.
That's right, yeah.
And then McFall came back into the fold. Norley backed out, went back to her seat, and Kelly was stuck with it because his wife had already
jumped
committed
to
right.
Yes, so
and he had time left on that without being term limited out like the rest of
Yes,
them.
I know. Well, he just made a mistake, that's all.